come here and you can make mistakes and get away with it. So, in 1898, there was a man-child born in Holman, New Mexico. Now, since most of you have never heard of Holman, New Mexico, it is a really small place. The population at that time was probably somewhere around 60 people. There were no jobs. Absolutely. Well, there were 8 jobs. We had 8 teachers, one for grades 1 through 8. But those were the only jobs in town. Everybody that lived there had a small farm, and they lived off the small farm. They raised animals, they raised their own food. They got by. But when this man-child grew up and he was in his teenage years, his father died. Left behind a wife, a daughter, and the man. The man happened to be my father. And as I relate the story, I'm going to pass this around. And as you look at it, see if you can place all those lines with some of the experiences I'm going to relate. His father died when he was a teenager. He was left to take care of his mother and his sister. And as I said, there were no jobs. He did not own land. So he used his ingenuity, and at that time, the United States was in the throes of building railroads. And one thing that all the railroads needed were railroad ties. So they would buy ties from anybody that would supply them. My father would get up early in the morning and hitch up the horse and the wagon and go up into the mountains and cut down trees with a hand axe, load up the wagon, bring all the logs back to the house, and then use the hand axe and the saw to manually make ties. And he would spend days making ties. And then he would load all those ties onto the wagon and drive to the railhead, which was a full day's journey from his house. So he'd drive all day to the railhead, sell the ties, come back home, and repeat. And that's the way he spent his youth. Well, eventually he got married. And the marriage, which should have been very happy, in those days, childbirth was a crisis. Children died in childbirth, mothers died in childbirth. My mother lost 5 or 6 children, either in childbirth or shortly thereafter. Well, my father figured he couldn't live there, so he got a job with the railroad in Colorado. And they moved to Colorado right after I had been born. My mother got pregnant again. She wanted to come back to New Mexico to be with her mother when she gave birth because of her experience. And my father, all I can say is they got in an argument, and he said, if you go, don't come back. My mother was strong. She went. She spent 5 years separated from her husband. After 5 years, they had this great reunion and everything was good again. However, he had a job as a sheep herder. In those days, jobs were hard. It was the Depression time. So any job he had was good. So he was out there herding the sheep while his wife was back in town taking care of us. And she got killed, along with my baby sister. So there's my father without a wife. He's got 3 boys, aged 10, 4, and 2. And there's no way that he can take care of 3 kids like that and earn a living. So he made the hard decision. He made the sacrifice and decided he couldn't take care of his 3 boys, so he had to give them away. Well, fortunately, my grandfather was there to take us, and we moved in with my grandfather. We stayed there for 2 years, and we came back to Colorado to be with my father. By that time, I was 12 years old, and he thought that between the 2 of us, we could take care of the 2 little kids. At that point, he was a coal miner. Coal miners worked all hours of the day and night. They had 3 shifts: day shift, evening shift, and night shift. So he was off working, and I was in charge of the family. Well, I was 12 years old, and I spent all my time in the pool halls. He didn't know what I was doing, but I spent time in the pool halls. And I pretty well run wild. Got with a bunch of kids that were about as wild as we were, and we stole a bunch of whiskey. We stole a case of whiskey. We thought we were pretty smart, but we got hauled into court. And when we got hauled into court, we had decided that we were just all going to plead not guilty, and they couldn't prove it. We got into court, and we looked in this big courtroom there, and this big this up there, and the judge is sitting up there, and this big burly guy, he starts out and he's reading the charges, and he's reading charges, and he's reading charges, and somewhere he comes into grand theft larceny. And the judge asked the first guy, he says, "How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?" "Guilty." "Guilty, guilty, guilty." We all pled guilty. My father immediately stood up and he says, "I am responsible for this. I will pay the merchants for all the whiskey. I will pay for all the court costs, and anything else that's required, I will pay for." Well, the judge decided that he would he said, "If you don't get in trouble for the next year, we're going to wipe that off your record." So there's my father's reward for all his hard work in raising us. The big thing that I want to mention about him is I thought when we got home, I was going to really get it. My father never mentioned the incident again in his whole life. He's working in a coal mine. He got caught in a cave-in, completely covered. When they hauled him out, his back was broken, his legs were broken. He was paralyzed from the waist down. His chest was injuries. And we lived in a small town with no hospital, so they put him in an ambulance, drove him to Denver, 180 miles away, to see if they could save him. We got to the hospital in Denver. It was crowded, and they took one look at him and says he's never going to make it. So they just put him out in the aisle and let him sit there. No treatment. I guess they did feed him once in a while. But eventually they found out he was still living. He refused to die. So then they started taking care of him. He was completely paralyzed. He went through rehab. It took him 4 or 5 months before he could get to the point where he could stand up and barely walk with a cane. So now he can't work. So does he throw up his hands and say, oh no, woe is me? No. He apprenticed to a shoemaker and learned the trade of a shoemaker, and the mine union bought him all the equipment he needed to run a shoe shop, and leased a shoe shop in a town 180 miles away. So he became a shoemaker. And if you look at that picture, one thing that I'd like you to note in there, there's no question that man. He didn't become president, but he's my hero.